I'm a storyteller, so no public engagement is valid without a story. One day this past spring, I walked out of my house on my way to do errands when I was immediately hit by an overwhelming sense of sadness. It was such a bright, wondrous day, and the heavy, sweet smell of blooming lilacs swirled around me. It should have made me happy, joyous, but instead it was the certain way the sunlight careened off the buildings and sidewalks, or the smell of spring, or a combination of both that swept me into the past. And no matter how bucolic or sun-swept my memories of the past may be, they almost always leave me sad. And so this story ends in a sadness of sorts, a caution, so to speak. I grew up in North Philadelphia, not far from the Philadelphia Zoo, and enmeshed in a neighborhood of intensity. It was a neighborhood of working-class black folks who had grabbed onto the promise of the American dream and were barely holding on. But on my street, the sun did shine. And Saturdays were full of purposeful activities like cleaning the house and turning the garden hose on cement sidewalks in front of the houses. As a child, I used to love pickles. Dill pickles, Jewish pickles, sour pickles, sweet and sour, hot or sweet, it didn't matter. Even thinking about this now brings a rush of saliva to my mouth. I attended an elementary school a block and a half from my house, so I always run home for lunchtime, eat the food my mother prepared, usually some sort of sandwich and a bowl of soup, and then I'd do or say whatever I had to get, in order to get out of the house. And with that remaining 15 or 20 minutes that I had left before the afternoon bell rang, I would set out for Little John's. Now, Little John's was one of those idiosyncratic stores you can always find in the inner city, a store that might carry an astonishing variety of goods from penny candy to staples, from bread to balloons, but does so in a space barely big enough for 10 people to stand in without touching. And Little John's was even more unusual in that it was a corner store that was actually located in the middle of the block. It was on Cyber Street, a couple of blocks away from in the opposite direction of my school. So I remember that as you approached the store, you'd be assaulted by this makeshift wooden enclosed stairway that just jutted straight out of the middle of the block. It would almost stop you from just walking by, forcing a kid like me, I'm going in. So you have to understand that in many of Philadelphia's inner cities, like in many communities, so many of the houses are exactly the same. Conjoined like a series of train cars being pulled toward the Delaware River or somewhere off in the distance, depending almost entirely on the creative and financial resources of the residents to distinguish one house from the other. It's a good thing that there are addresses. That's all I'm really saying here. So Little John's was a small wonder. And inside Little John's, there was always a barrel full of pungent brine. Pungent brine. And swimming in that brine were the largest dang dill pickles you've ever seen. Bigger than any pickles I've seen since. And it wasn't just that they were big, they were fully pickled. So thoroughly saturated that the first bite might close your mouth all together in a tight vinegared clench. So what I'm saying is I'd rush from my mother's wholesome Campbell's soup lunch, for which I now realize I owe such an amazing debt, head straight for Little John's. There, for a mere quarter, I would dive into that barrel and spear my catch. And from there, I was destined back to school, obviously unconcerned with the damage that pickle might do to my natural cologne. Now, I remember walking out of Little John's with this big pickle and literally skipping up the street. Skipping, I tell you. And in this memory, the sun fanned the most brilliant light all about, and the bricks were vivid red, and the asphalt the deepest black, and I was just so happy. This is proof. I was innocent then. Only someone who is without guilt can skip. The slightest weight of guilt will take the skip right out of your gate. But on this day, there were no suspicious eyes on me, no sense of outsiderness, of being the son of a demon, nor a criminal. I was just the happiest little colored boy, sucking on my dill pickle and tra-la-lying home. But I will refrain, and you have to know, there is an art to eating a pickle. But I will refrain from the details of this joy, for in a world colored by a brilliant but only half-right pioneer psychotherapist, who shall not be named here, my description would almost certainly be misinterpreted. It must then suffice to say that I know that once I was innocent. And by innocent, I mean that I knew the world was open to me, that I was without guilt, that no one suspected me of any crime. How special this was for an African-American boy to be able to skip effortlessly down the street. But more to the point, imagine how rare that is today. Black boys are suspected of criminal intent so early in their lives. These days, they hardly ever get a full measure of innocence, which, by the way, I believe is essential to being a healthy adult. We must know what it means to feel innocent. It's one of the most significant benchmarks in a person's life. And I know that my mother understood this and did the only thing a parent could do. She tried in so many ways to preserve my innocence as long as she could. No one else told me that no matter how smart you are, how much you believe you can do anything you put your mind to, all that stuff, the truth is the energy you need to be whole in this culture will be taken from you as a rite of passage. Those are your dues as a person of color, as a black person in America. You must give up your innocence, be seen as guilty, eventually feel guilty before you even get a chance to demonstrate your potential.